The illusion of accomplishment. Unpacking verbal virtue. The human experience frequently presents moments where a declared intention feels remarkably akin to an accomplished deed. This phenomenon, which can be termed verbal virtue, captures the fleeting, often deceptive sense of gratification derived from merely articulating a goal or making a promise, rather than from the demanding process of actualization. The common experience of mentally committing to an activity, such as going to the gym, and experiencing an immediate sense of satisfaction, only to later fail to follow through, perfectly illustrates this instant, yet ultimately unearned positive feeling. This initial satisfaction represents a psychological mechanism where the brain, in its inherent drive for efficiency, prematurely registers the intention as if it were the action itself. While distinct, verbal virtue shares subtle connections with other psychological concepts. It bears a kinship with wishful thinking, which involves forming beliefs based on what one desires to be true, rather than on objective evidence or reality. While wishful thinking centers on believing something is true because it is pleasing to imagine, verbal virtue focuses on the feeling of accomplishment simply because an intention has been stated. The phenomenon also touches upon the mere measurement effect, where the act of questioning an individual's intentions can, paradoxically, influence their subsequent behavior. However, verbal virtue specifically delves into the internal reward derived from the verbalization itself, a reward that can, counterintuitively, undermine subsequent effort. The brain, an organ perpetually optimizing for efficiency, often seeks the path of least resistance. When an individual verbalizes a goal, particularly one that aligns with a desired self-image, for instance, "I am going to be a healthier person," or "I am committed to productivity," the brain may interpret this verbal commitment as a sufficient proxy for the actual, energy-intensive effort required for genuine achievement. This constitutes a form of cognitive shortcut. The immediate release of dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward, reinforces this shortcut, making the act of stating the goal feel intrinsically rewarding. This premature reward can temporarily satisfy the brain's innate drive for competence and accomplishment, effectively conflating the internal narrative of, "I am a person who intends to do X," with the more demanding reality of, "I am a person who does X." This subtle self-deception can inadvertently divert motivational resources away from the actual behavioral execution. Furthermore, while the subjective experience of verbal virtue highlights internal feelings, the act of promising you're going to do something often implies an audience, whether an explicit declaration to others, an imagined future self, or even a perceived social expectation. Research indicates that publicizing goals, especially those tied to one's identity, can compromise actual performance because it provides a premature sense of completeness and an immediate dopamine rush from the acknowledgement and admiration of others. This suggests that verbal virtue is not solely an internal phenomenon. It can be significantly amplified by perceived social validation. The brain, inherently driven by the need for competence and the avoidance of incompetence, may be particularly susceptible to this if it perceives a deficit in its current state, prompting it to seek external affirmation as a substitute for internal achievement. This dynamic connects to the concept of arrogance, where an unwarranted attitude of superiority might be projected through verbal intentions, satisfying social aspirations without the underlying substance of effort. The chasm between intention and action, a fundamental human challenge. The fleeting satisfaction derived from verbal virtue frequently obscures a deeper, more pervasive psychological challenge, the intention-behavior gap. This widely documented phenomenon describes the common failure to translate good intentions into desired actions. Empirical data underscores this disconnect, suggesting that intention predicts a mere 30% to 40% of the variation in health behavior. This striking quantitative measure immediately highlights the magnitude of this widespread psychological challenge, demonstrating that it is not merely an anecdotal observation but a statistically significant and pervasive phenomenon. This statistic also establishes the urgency and relevance of understanding why intentions often fail to translate into action, setting a compelling empirical foundation for the subsequent discussion on psychological mechanisms and solutions. The user's relatable struggle of mentally committing to the gym but failing to go perfectly illustrates this pervasive gap. Indeed, the very essence of motivation theories in psychology grapples with Aristotle's ancient inquiry. How does it happen that thinking is sometimes followed by action and sometimes not? Beyond the deceptive allure of verbalization, numerous factors contribute to this persistent chasm. Individuals frequently face competing goals or desires, such as the aspiration for regular exercise clashing with the immediate comfort of relaxing after a long day. This internal struggle between immediate gratification, often termed want goals, and long-term objectives, or should goals, can lead to cognitive dissonance, emotional distress, or decision paralysis, ultimately weakening commitment. External factors also serve as formidable barriers, distractions, or temptations. These environmental influences include physical surroundings, where a cluttered workspace can hinder focus while an organized one enhances productivity. Social pressures such as peer influence or societal norms can conflict with personal goals. Limited access to crucial resources like time or money, and the disruptive impact of stressful situations or unexpected changes in routine further contribute to the challenge. The ability to effectively manage one's thoughts, emotions, and actions, encompassing self-control, emotional regulation, and impulse management, is paramount for goal attainment. A deficit in these self-regulatory skills impedes the capacity to resist immediate gratification and sustain focus on long-term intentions, as successful self-regulation requires subordinating short-term temptations to future rewards. Goals adopted primarily due to external pressures, such as social expectations, rather than genuine intrinsic interests and personal values, are significantly less likely to be achieved. Autonomously formulated goals, deeply rooted in personal purpose, prove far more resilient and motivating. A common pitfall is the failure to formulate structured, specific plans detailing when, where, and how a goal will be pursued, particularly in anticipation of distractions or obstacles. This is precisely where the strategic power of implementation intentions becomes indispensable. A pervasive cognitive bias, the planning fallacy, describes the tendency to underestimate the time required to complete future tasks, even when confronted with past evidence that similar tasks consistently took longer than anticipated. This ingrained optimism contributes significantly to the intention-behavior gap, as unrealistic timelines set the stage for inevitable failure. The intention-behavior gap represents more than a simple failure to reach a goal. It carries profound psychological costs. When individuals repeatedly fail to act on their stated intentions, it can systematically erode their self-efficacy, their belief in their own capability to succeed. If the brain consistently receives the false achievement reward from mere verbalization, but then experiences the stark reality of non-action, it establishes a deeply ingrained pattern of disconnect. This can lead to a form of learned helplessness regarding goal pursuit, where the individual unconsciously learns that verbalizing is sufficient for internal reward, or that actual effort is futile in the face of perceived obstacles. This dynamic further widens the intention-behavior gap over time. Moreover, this persistent discrepancy between one's self-perception, "I am a person who sets ambitious goals," and the actual behavioral outcome, "I consistently fail to achieve them," generates cognitive dissonance. The mind, in its attempt to alleviate this discomfort, often resorts to rationalization or self-licensing, thereby preventing the necessary behavioral adjustments that true goal attainment demands. The research highlights that both internal conflicts, such as the want-should dilemma, and deficits in self-regulation, and external pressures, including social norms, resource constraints, and unforeseen events, contribute to the intention-behavior gap. The verbal virtue phenomenon likely exacerbates this interplay. Consider an individual who publicizes a goal primarily due to social pressure, an external motivational factor. If this public declaration then garners immediate social validation and a dopamine rush, this external reward effectively bypasses the need for intrinsic motivation or sustained internal drive. Consequently, when faced with genuine internal conflicts or environmental obstacles, the individual becomes even more susceptible to the gap. The brain, having already received its social reward, may subconsciously deprioritize the actual, more demanding work required, viewing the cost of effort as disproportionate to the already received benefit of social approval. The brain's deceptive rewards, dopamine and premature satisfaction. At the core of verbal virtue lies a fascinating, albeit deceptive, neurobiological mechanism involving the brain's reward system. The very act of setting a goal, even if only verbally, triggers this intricate system, leading to the release of dopamine, a powerful neurotransmitter intrinsically linked to feelings of pleasure, motivation, and accomplishment. This is precisely why individuals often experience an initial surge of excitement and energy when embarking on a new aspiration. The primary orchestrator of this rewarding sensation is the mesolimbic dopamine system, a critical neural circuit comprising the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and the nucleus accumbens, NAC. This ancient pathway is exquisitely designed to detect and respond to rewarding stimuli, regulating responses to natural rewards such as food, social interaction, and even sex. It is, in essence, a fundamental determinant of motivation and incentive drive. When activated, this pathway sends a clear signal to the brain. Repeat what you just did to get that reward. Simultaneously, it prompts memory centers to meticulously record the details of the rewarding experience, ensuring its future repetition. Ideally, this system reinforces productive behaviors. Each small, tangible step taken towards a goal should stimulate a measured release of dopamine, thereby fueling sustained motivation. However, verbal virtue exploits this system, triggering a premature and unearned reward. The mere articulation of a goal, or even the perception of progress towards its implementation, can generate positive, rewarding feelings. For these emotions to genuinely serve as a motivational force until the goal is fully realized, the reward must be time-released, corresponding to actual effort and achievement. The critical problem arises when the brain is tricked into believing the goal has already been achieved. In such instances, it ceases to invest energy towards further implementation actions. This deception is particularly potent when goals are publicized. When individuals declare their intentions to others, and these intentions are met with acknowledgement, admiration, or praise, a significant dopamine reward can be released all at once. The greater the social admiration for the declared goal, the more intense the dopamine rush, and, paradoxically, the less likely the individual is to execute the necessary future actions. This premature gratification effectively depletes the feel-good motivational fuel, preventing the individual from reaching their final destination, the actual goal. This public declaration creates a premature sense of completeness, signaling to the brain that the task is accomplished, prompting it to move on. Consequently, the brain may actively inhibit the specific neural circuits related to further pursuing this goal. This detrimental effect extends even to prematurely announcing success on sub-goals, which can stagnate further progress. In the realm of neuroscience, dopamine's role is often understood through the lens of reward prediction error, the discrepancy between an anticipated reward and the actual reward received. A positive prediction error, reward is better than expected, drives learning and strengthens behaviors. Conversely, verbal virtue can be conceptualized as a negative reward prediction error for the actual effort required. When an individual verbalizes a goal, particularly publicly, the brain predicts a future reward from achieving that goal. However, the act of verbalization itself, especially when met with social affirmation, generates a premature and unearned dopamine signal. This unearned reward mimics the satisfaction of actual achievement. Consequently, when the individual subsequently contemplates the genuine effort needed, the brain has already received its reward for the intention. This mechanism explains why the drive for actual effort diminishes. The brain's motivational system has been short-circuited, perceiving the goal as already accomplished. The research highlights a particularly insidious aspect. Publicizing goals, especially those related to one's identity, significantly compromises performance. When an individual declares, "I am going to become a disciplined runner," or "I am now a highly organized person," the brain is subtly tricked into believing that this future, competent self is, in fact, the current real self. The immediate dopamine rush derived from others admiring this potential reinforces this false identity. This represents a deeper level of self-deception than mere accomplishment. It is a false sense of being. This perceived being then paradoxically reduces the intrinsic motivation to do the work necessary to embody that identity. This suggests a crucial distinction. Verbalizing process-oriented goals, e.g., "I will run 3 times a week," might be less detrimental than verbalizing identity-oriented goals, e.g., "I am a runner," as the latter provides a more potent, and thus more debilitating premature identity reward, effectively satisfying the ego without requiring the labor. The role of public commitment in goal achievement is complex and often contradictory. While public commitments, defined as stating one's intention to perform a behavior or achieve an outcome so others become aware, can sometimes be beneficial by enhancing commitment, especially when linked with external rewards or punishments. Research on their overall effectiveness yields mixed results. A compelling theory for these mixed outcomes is that the very act of announcing an intention can confer social status or benefit up front. If this social reward is gained prematurely, the actual performance of the behavior may diminish in importance for the individual, particularly when weighed against the long-term costs and efforts required to achieve the goal. This phenomenon also intertwines with the concept of conformity, where individuals might verbally align with group expectations or societal norms by stating ambitious goals, not out of genuine intent to achieve, but to avoid appearing foolish or to gain social approval, further reinforcing the deceptive cycle of verbal virtue. The brain's reward pathways are products of ancient evolutionary pressures, designed to reinforce behaviors vital for survival and successful social integration. In ancestral human societies, verbalizing intentions to a communal group likely served a genuinely adaptive function, fostering social support, collective effort, and mutual accountability, which in turn facilitated the actualization of those intentions. Social interactions and approval were direct, tangible rewards linked to productive group behaviors. However, in contemporary society, social validation can be instantaneous, widespread, and often detached from actual effort, such as social media likes or fleeting verbal praise. The brain, operating on its ancient programming, still registers this social approval as a reward, but the crucial link to actual productive behavior is severed. This creates a maladaptive loop where the feel-good energy is expended on the verbalization itself, rather than conserved for the sustained effort needed for genuine achievement. This is a powerful illustration of how an evolutionarily adaptive mechanism can become a cognitive trap in a rapidly changed environment. Self-licensing and cognitive dissonance, the mind's justifications for inaction. Beyond the immediate neurochemical trickery, the mind employs sophisticated cognitive strategies to maintain a comfortable internal narrative, even in the face of inaction. Two powerful psychological phenomena, self-licensing and cognitive dissonance, play crucial roles in perpetuating the cycle of verbal virtue and hindering genuine progress. The self-licensing effect describes a tendency for individuals to use prior good intentions or moral deeds as a psychological license to indulge in subsequent behaviors that contradict their long-term goals. It is, in essence, the act of preemptively making excuses for a prospective failure, thereby rendering the discrepant behavior acceptable to oneself before it even occurs. This mechanism adeptly resolves the internal conflict between immediate temptations, the want goals, like indulging in a forbidden treat, and long-term objectives, the should goals, such as weight control. By employing these justifications, the mental friction arising from contemplating a deviation from one's standards is significantly reduced, making the indulgence feel less like a failure. This process effectively attenuates the perceived threat to successful goal pursuit and, crucially, diminishes the felt need to activate self-control strategies. Common self-licensing justifications include phrases like, "I was on the right track," "I did my best," or "I worked hard." These positive self-attributions, often stemming from prior intentions or minor efforts, are then leveraged to justify subsequent indulgence. While typically maladaptive, self-licensing can, in nuanced scenarios, have an adaptive side by preserving perceived self-regulatory ability after an initial slip, potentially preventing a full what the hell effect, where a minor deviation leads to complete abandonment of the goal. However, this adaptive function is not universally observed and can be highly context-dependent. Cognitive dissonance is an uncomfortable psychological state that arises when an individual unknowingly holds two or more fundamentally conflicting cognitions, which can include beliefs, actions, feelings, ideas, or values. This discomfort stems from a deep-seated human aversion to inconsistency. When confronted with conflicting thoughts, individuals experience an unpleasant state of anxiety and agitation, which they are powerfully motivated to resolve. The intensity of this discomfort, or the magnitude of dissonance, is directly proportional to the importance of the conflicting cognitions and their ratio. People employ various strategies to reduce cognitive dissonance. Changing behavior or cognition, directly altering the action or belief causing the inconsistency. For example, choosing not to eat the donut if one is on a diet. And justifying behavior by changing conflicting cognition, modifying one of the conflicting beliefs to align with the behavior, such as rationalizing eating a donut by thinking, "I am allowed to cheat my diet every once in a while," and justifying behavior by adding new cognitions, introducing new elements that support the dissonant behavior, for instance, stating, "I will spend 30 extra minutes at the gym to work off the donut," ignoring or denying conflicting information, actively avoiding or rejecting information that would increase the dissonance. Crucially, when faced with cognitive dissonance, most individuals tend to rationalize or even alter their perception of reality to align with their existing, strongly held beliefs, rather than changing those beliefs. This tendency is linked to cognitive biases such as the bias blind spot, where one perceives oneself as less biased than others, the better-than-average effect, where one believes oneself superior, and confirmation bias, where one interprets information to support pre-existing beliefs. Verbal virtue provides an initial unearned reward, creating a psychological head start without actual effort. This unearned reward, when combined with the self-licensing effect, forms a potent mechanism for justifying subsequent inaction. If merely stating a goal feels good, and any deviation from that goal can then be justified through rationalizations like, "I worked hard enough today," or "I am still on the right track," the individual never truly confronts the uncomfortable discrepancy between their stated intentions and their actual behavior. This effectively prevents the full force of cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort that typically motivates change, from being experienced. Instead, the dissonance is comfortably resolved through rationalization and self-licensing, rather than through genuine behavioral adjustment. This creates a deeply ingrained, self-perpetuating cycle, where the verbal act and subsequent justifications become a comfortable, low-effort alternative to actual sustained effort, effectively immunizing the individual against the very psychological discomfort that might otherwise drive authentic change and progress. Wishful thinking, a close cousin to both self-licensing and cognitive dissonance, further facilitates inaction. It is the formation of beliefs based on what one desires to be true, rather than on objective evidence, rationality, or reality. It serves as a psychological mechanism for resolving conflicts between belief and desire. This often manifests as an overestimation of the likelihood of desirable events, even when objective probabilities are low. Wishful thinking can operate unconsciously, serving as a less taxing cognitive strategy than critical thinking, and it inherently brings positive emotions, which can be misattributed to the soundness of one's decisions. Its mechanisms include attentional bias, where one selectively focuses on supporting evidence, interpretation bias, where one selectively interprets cues, or response bias, where one inserts bias into one's response. While wishful thinking can, in rare instances, act as a self-fulfilling prophecy by motivating action, it more frequently leads to disappointment when unrealistic expectations clash with reality. Wishful thinking, the inherent human tendency to believe what is pleasing, acts as a crucial cognitive lubricant for the verbal virtue phenomenon. When an individual verbalizes a goal, they often simultaneously wish for the positive outcome to materialize with minimal effort. Wishful thinking allows them to unconsciously overestimate the likelihood of success or to disregard and underestimate potential negative consequences, thereby making the verbal commitment feel far more substantial and effective than it truly is. This inherent optimism bias reduces the perceived urgency for detailed planning or immediate, arduous action, as the desired outcome is wished into a higher probability of effortless attainment. This psychological interplay is particularly insidious because it is less about a conscious deception and more about an unconscious cognitive bias that makes the path of least resistance. Verbalization coupled with optimistic fantasy appear to be a genuinely viable route to achievement. The concept of arrogance, characterized by imperfect self-knowledge and an unrealistic assessment of one's abilities, finds a dangerous synergy with verbal virtue. When an individual repeatedly experiences the false gratification of verbal virtue, they may develop an arrogance of inaction, a deeply ingrained belief in their inherent capability to achieve goals without expending the necessary effort, simply because they have articulated the intention. This overconfidence, akin to component 2 of arrogance, can lead to a resistance to new, often uncomfortable information about oneself, component 3, and a diminished capacity for perspective taking, component 4, if such insights challenge their self-proclaimed virtuous intentions. The cognitive dissonance that would normally arise from the stark reality of actual failure is then swiftly resolved through rationalizations such as, "I am simply too busy," or "that goal was not truly important anyway," rather than through a painful yet necessary acknowledgement of a flaw in their self-regulatory process. This creates a robust psychological shield that effectively prevents genuine self-correction and perpetuates the cycle of unfulfilled intentions. Bridging the divide. Strategies for authentic achievement. Recognizing the pervasive nature of the intention-behavior gap and the deceptive allure of verbal virtue is the crucial first step towards cultivating genuine progress. The challenge lies in transforming fleeting intentions into consistent actions, a divide that can be effectively bridged through evidence-based psychological strategies. The core of overcoming this gap is to fundamentally shift from mere abstract goal intentions to concrete, actionable implementation intentions. An implementation intention is a powerful self-regulatory strategy formulated as an if-then plan, meticulously linking anticipated critical situations to specific goal-directed responses. The structure is elegantly simple. When situation X arises, I will perform response Y. This strategic pre-planning delegates the control of goal-directed behaviors to anticipated situational cues, ensuring that when those cues are encountered, the desired response is elicited automatically and efficiently, akin to creating instant habits. Implementation intentions promote goal attainment through 2 primary psychological mechanisms. Heightened accessibility of the specified situation. The mental representation of the anticipated situation becomes highly activated and easily accessible, improving detection, attention, and recall of the critical cue. Automatization of the intended behavior. By linking a specific behavior to a chosen situation, the action initiation becomes swift, efficient, and requires minimal conscious effort. Empirical evidence overwhelmingly supports their effectiveness across diverse domains. For instance, studies have shown that 100% of women who formed an implementation intention performed breast self-examination, compared to only 53% of those who did not. Obese women who created specific implementation intentions for dieting and exercise lost an average of 4.2 kilos over 2 months, significantly more than a control group's 2.1 kilo loss. There is also evidence of increased fruit and vegetable intake by half a portion per day through implementation intentions. Furthermore, studies have shown increased voter turnout by 4.1 percentage points and flu shot uptake by 4 percentage points when individuals were prompted to form implementation intentions. Crucially, these plans specify when, where, and how the desired behavior will occur, and the then clause must be applied strictly, without exception, to maintain its efficacy. They are particularly potent for individuals already highly committed to their goals. Beyond implementation intentions, strategic goal setting is paramount. Goals must deeply align with one's personal values and desires to truly resonate and activate intrinsic motivation, which research consistently shows is far more effective than external rewards for sustained long-term achievement. The widely recognized SMART framework provides a neuroscientifically aligned approach to goal setting. Specific. Goals must be clear and precise, providing definite guidance such as run 3 miles 3 times a week instead of get fit. The brain thrives on clarity. Measurable. The ability to track progress is vital for maintaining motivation. Breaking down larger goals into smaller, measurable milestones offers regular opportunities for legitimate reward, reinforcing commitment. Vesa. Achievable, realistic. Goals should be challenging enough to be motivating, but remain within reach to prevent frustration and burnout. The sweet spot is challenging enough to excite dopamine release, but not so hard as to trigger a stress response. Relevant. Goals pertinent to one's personal life or career foster a strong sense of purpose, deeply connecting to one's why, and activating the brain's emotional centers. Time-bound. Establishing clear deadlines creates a sense of urgency, aids in prioritization, and combats procrastination, helping the brain focus its resources. Challenging goals, when coupled with commitment, consistently lead to better performance than easy or vague ones. Furthermore, the simple act of writing goals down activates both the left and right hemispheres of the brain, making the goal more tangible and increasing commitment. Cultivating robust self-regulation and resilience is equally critical. Self-regulation, the capacity to manage one's thoughts, emotions, and actions to achieve long-term goals, is a learnable skill. Key components include delaying gratification, a fundamental skill for sustained success. Developing emotional intelligence. This involves the ability to motivate oneself, persist through frustrations, control impulses, and regulate mood. In building positive habits, habits once formed become automatic, demanding fewer conscious resources and making self-discipline less necessary. The habit loop of cue, routine, and reward is central to this process. Consciously avoiding cues associated with negative habits and replacing old habits with new, desired ones is an effective strategy. Fostering resilience. The ability to bounce back from setbacks, viewing failures not as endpoints but as invaluable learning opportunities, is vital for long-term success. Embracing adaptability. When circumstances inevitably change, resilient individuals reassess and recalibrate their goals rather than abandoning them, ensuring continued progress even if the path shifts. Practicing mindfulness. This cultivates increased self-awareness and emotional regulation, enabling individuals to navigate internal conflicts more effectively. Creating supportive environments. Strategically organizing physical spaces, such as a designated workout area, surrounding oneself with positive influences, and establishing consistent routines can significantly bolster efforts. Anticipating barriers. Proactively identifying and preparing for potential challenges in advance strengthens one's ability to stay committed. Finally, visualization stands as a powerful psychological strategy. Mentally rehearsing success makes goals feel more attainable. The brain processes vivid mental imagery in a remarkably similar way to real-life experiences. By visualizing success, individuals prime their minds to identify opportunities, overcome obstacles, and maintain motivation. This process stimulates the same brain regions active during actual achievement, activating reward pathways and releasing dopamine, thereby creating a sense of pleasure and motivation. Furthermore, visualization effectively communicates goals to the subconscious mind, which then actively works to guide thoughts and actions toward their achievement.